Since my last video was about a version of the Kalam Cosmological Argument, I think it would be fitting for me to review some critiques of this argument from an atheist, so let's see what he's got.
It goes like this. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore, the universe has a cause.
The first thing worth noting is that this is the entire argument, and yet the word God appears nowhere. For the sake of discussion, I could accept the entire thing as is, and all we would have to agree to is that there was a sufficient cause for the universe. To make the leap that this cause is a deity is entirely outside of the scope of the cosmological argument, and does not follow from the premises.
I am shocked that he is already misunderstanding the argument when we just started the video. The main point of what I will call step 1 of the Kalam Cosmological Argument, which is composed of the 3 sentences on screen, is to establish that the universe had a cause for its existence. The first step of the argument is deductive and theologically neutral, and thus not about the existence of God. To judge an argument based on something that it is not trying to conclude in the first step is absurd, so this atheist objection is unfounded. Instead, the atheist should save this criticism for what I will call the second step of the argument, which is an inference to the best explanation, to where God is then brought into the argument as the best explanation for what caused the universe to exist. Therefore, the atheist's criticism, due to a misunderstanding of the first step of the Kalam, is completely misplaced and can be dismissed.
But still, let's let Craig take a closer look.
Is the first premise true? Let's consider. Believing that something can pop into existence without a cause is more of a stretch than believing in magic. At least with magic, you've got a hat and a magician.
Did Craig just admit that a good analogy for God would be a magician? Interesting.
No, the video did not state that a good analogy for God would be a magician. The video did not even mention God in that clip. Rather, the clip is demonstrating how preposterous some atheistic beliefs are, because if some atheists conclude that something came from nothing without a cause, then that would be more ridiculous than believing in magic, because with magic you have something coming from something else, like a rabbit coming out of a hat. On the other hand, if someone believes that the universe came from nothing without a cause, that would violate the law of causality, because they are saying something like an entire universe can just pop into existence with no rhyme or reason without a cause, which truly is more ridiculous than magic. It seems that the atheist already has 2 misunderstandings about the argument, but hopefully things will clear up later.
If we're going to evaluate the truth of the first premise, we might first consider defining terms. What does it mean to begin to exist? For example, when does a chair begin to exist? Is it when the plans are drawn up? When the wood is cut? When the pieces are assembled? The first time someone sits on it? In fact, perhaps we would be better off reworking the entire argument.
For the record, he starts off this clip saying that we should define our terms, but yet never gives a definition. As a reminder, the first premise of what I will call step 1 of the Kalam Cosmological Argument is that, quote, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Again, we see him misunderstanding the argument. In the Kalam, the correct meaning of the words begins to exist in that order means that the universe had an efficient cause, which brought it into existence without using prior material. In contrast to the true definition of what it means to begin to exist in terms of the Kalam, this individual arbitrarily redefines what the Kalam means by forcing a composite-type definition on it. He uses the example of a chair, where already existing material, such as wood, is composed, designed, shaped, and then used as a chair. But that is not the type of, quote, begins to exist that the Kalam is talking about. The Kalam is pointing us to an efficient cause of the universe that does not have a material cause, which is unlike a composite definition, which has both an efficient and a material cause. For the chair analogy to work, you would need a chair to be created from no pre-existing material, instead of it being assembled from existing matter like wood. Therefore, yet again, his criticism is unfounded, and it exposes yet another one of his misunderstandings, or potentially a purposeful misrepresentation of what the Kalam means by the terms begins to exist. The atheist will now attempt to run a parallel argument to try to mimic the Kalam, yet give it a different conclusion. So let's see it.
Premise 1. Everything that begins to exist is a rearrangement of things that already exist. Premise 2. The universe began to exist. Conclusion. The universe is a rearrangement of things that already exist. That is equally as valid as the Kalam, and brings us to the conclusion that our universe came not from nothing, but from something pre-existing, which we'll get to later.
This argument is a philosophical blunder. Not only are his misunderstandings of the Kalam baked into this argument, but his argument is also unsound. For instance, in premise 1, the term rearrangement implies a prior original arrangement of physical reality, which must already exist in order to be rearranged. This would mean that he has time and matter that can be rearranged before the universe exists, which is impossible because if time and matter existed, then the universe exists, because the universe in the Kalam means physical reality, which includes time and matter. Do you see the problem yet? Essentially, he has an eternal universe that has a beginning, which is a contradiction. If something is eternal, then it does not have a beginning. For example, in premise 1, he has eternal matter, which is in an arrangement before it can be rearranged to create things. But that matter would be defined as the universe, which means that the universe is eternal because the matter is eternal. And this ultimately violates premise 2, which says that the universe began to exist. Therefore, it seems that he has an eternal universe and a universe that began to exist. Therefore, either premise 1 or 2 is false, and therefore the argument fails due to this internal critique and contradiction in the argument. However, let's press on to see what else he has in store for us.
As for a cause, well, in order for a cause and effect to have relevance, it's clear that one would need to have time as well. Cause must come temporally before effect. If we try to extend this premise beyond time as we know it, then we'd be in a realm where there might not be causation as we know it. Outside the scope of our universe, we can't know if this premise holds.
Here we have him yet again changing what the Kalam means by the term universe. When the Kalam uses the term universe, it means all of physical reality, and not just our cosmic pocket. But we will talk more about this later. The atheist then goes on to say that cause and effect need time, so we don't know if this would work outside of our universe. But on a naturalistic worldview, there is nothing outside of our universe, so he can't posit a solution, which is exactly why instead he decides to appeal to ignorance about us not knowing if the premise holds. However, it seems that he is mistaken about cause and effect in general, because of what's called simultaneous causation, which describes a cause that occurs simultaneously or at the same time as its effect. To illustrate this point, I will give 3 examples of this. Number 1, in classical electromagnetism, magnetic fields and electric fields cause each other simultaneously. Number 2, if you lean against a wall, the pressure which you exert on the wall is the exact amount of pressure that the wall is supporting. They are completely linked and simultaneous, because the more pressure you put on the wall, the more the wall will support, as long as it doesn't give out. Number 3, a triangle having 3 sides is both the cause and effect of the triangle, because as soon as the correct geometry occurs, the 3 sides are the triangle itself, so both the 3 sides coming together and the triangle exist simultaneously. Therefore, he is wrong in regards to how cause and effect work, and therefore his objections are null and void up to this point.
But what about our second premise? Did the universe begin, or has it always existed? Atheists have typically said that the universe has been here forever.
Again, it's important to understand terms. In this case, the difference between universe and cosmos, as they are used in science, since that's where the discussion will be going. The cosmos, as the late great Carl Sagan put it,
the cosmos is all that is, or ever was, or ever will be.
Whereas the universe is best defined as the single instantiation of space-time where we live. The universe is part of the cosmos, like a storage unit is part of a storage facility. And we have no way of knowing if we are merely one among many universes, or one in a succession of universes, or maybe the only universe. What's important is that modern cosmologists don't say that the universe has been here forever and is just there and that's all, as Craig asserts. That's how they would describe the cosmos. In science, cosmos and universe are not interchangeable terms.
He says that universe and cosmos are very different terms, but in the everyday use of the word, the universe is described as all existing matter and space considered as a whole, aka the cosmos. And this is exactly how the Kalam is using this term. In the Kalam, the universe means all of physical reality, which would include multiverses, quantum mechanics, physics, other physical dimensions, and so on. Also, remember the name of the argument that we're discussing. It's called the Kalam Cosmological Argument, where cosmological is referring to the cosmos. I also want to mention that we are using philosophy as our main source of knowledge, while we are using science as supporting evidence. So for this atheist to act as if we are using the scientific term for physical reality, which according to him is cosmos, instead of the philosophical or everyday term, such as universe, it's a cheap trick. But even if he were right, we would simply need to switch out the term universe for the term cosmos, and the argument would still work as intended, so the criticism does not stop the argument.
Craig's video goes on to appeal to science's acceptance of the Big Bang Theory to establish that the universe had a beginning. As long as Craig sticks to the scientific definition of universe, and doesn't pretend that it's the same as the cosmos, then we can skip that part and all just agree. Oh, wait.
First, let's consider the second law of thermodynamics. It tells us the universe is slowly running out of usable energy.
I'm going to want to talk about the first law of thermodynamics.
In this response, I will only be dealing with the first and second law of thermodynamics, because if you want more details about the evidence and how it points to the universe having a finite beginning, I suggest that you watch the videos in the description. In a nutshell, we know that premise 2 of the Kalam is true, which, as a reminder, says that the universe began to exist. We know that the universe began to exist, and we know that it's not eternal because of the second law of thermodynamics, and it states that the universe is a closed system that is running out of usable energy every single day. But if the universe were past eternal, then there would be an infinite amount of days before today, which means our limited amount of energy would be used up by now. However, since we still have usable energy, that means that the past is not eternal, so the universe must have had a beginning.
Carry on.
It's quite plausible then that both premises of the argument are true. This means that the conclusion is also true. The universe has a cause.
Right. The argument concludes that the universe has a sufficient cause. Still no discussion of God, and the video is almost over.
So far, the Kalam has stood firm, and it has not been shaken by any of the critiques. So, with both premises being more plausible than their negations, then the argument is on solid ground. And since whatever begins to exist has a cause, the universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause, we can now close step 1 of this argument. Because remember, step 1 does not prove God. It only tries to prove that the universe had a cause for its existence. So, with step 1 complete, now we will move on to step 2, which is where God comes in. For this atheistic apologist to criticize step 1 of the argument, which is theologically neutral, as if it's step 2 of the argument, which does invoke God, just shows that he truly does not understand the argument, and his objections are surface level and irrelevant at best, and at worst, they are willful misrepresentations of science and philosophy, but more on that later. For now, let's see what else he can conjure up.
It was almost over.
And since the universe can't cause itself, its cause must be beyond the space-time universe.
So far, so good.
It must be spaceless.
Whoa! We went over the rails right on the first one. Craig himself describes our universe as the space-time universe. The Big Bang was the start of our universe's local space coordinates, x, y, and z, and time, t. But just as a piece of graph paper has its own localized XY spatial coordinate system, that piece of paper still exists in the universe's three-dimensional space. The cosmos may well have its own spatial dimensions. It may have many more dimensions than our 4, or perhaps it could have even 0 dimensions. The point is, there could be any number of sufficient causes for our universe that exist in some semblance of space outside of our version of it. The cause needn't be spaceless.
Here he says that the cause doesn't need to be spaceless, but he doesn't actually posit any entity, and if he does, he certainly doesn't defend any. He's actually appealing to ignorance here by saying that because we don't know if there are other spacetimes or dimensions, we can't say that the cause is spaceless. The skepticism here is unjustified, because unless the gentleman has good evidence for these unobservable spacetimes which are unverified, then we need to play by the rules of what we do know and not by what we don't know. Now, with that being said, we can take what we do know and try to arrive at the best explanation, which is what we are trying to do right now. This means we need to use the evidence which we do have about space and time and its beginnings, because whatever caused space-time by definition needs to be outside of space-time. You should also remember that we actually already answered this objection, because physical reality includes all other spacetimes, dimensions, and multiverses. So yet again, there are no good objections or criticisms here. To simply say that a multiverse generator or that another spacetime or dimension created ours, that doesn't answer the problem of how all of physical reality came to be, because ultimately those other things need causes as well. Therefore, these objections and criticisms are dismissed.
Timeless?
What applied to the 3 dimensions of space equally applies to the 4th dimension of time. A stopwatch has its own temporal system, but the one pressing the start button still exists in their own temporal system. The cosmos may have its own system of time, or it may exist in such a state that the idea of time is incoherent. We don't yet know what the sufficient cause of the universe was, but it could easily have been temporal.
Here the atheist pleads ignorance yet again by only saying what may be the case, but he gives no evidence for what is the case. Now, what I do find interesting is that he stated that the cause of time could be temporal, which doesn't make much sense to me, because temporality requires time. So whatever caused time must be beyond time, at least initially, because in our previous video, we talked about how time itself cannot be past eternal. But I digress. Let's continue. Let me now quote an actual physicist about this subject, who is none other than Stephen Hawking. He wrote the following quote in The Nature of Space and Time, which says this, quote, "Almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang," end quote. So unless the atheist on screen thinks time had another beginning, or that the cause of time wasn't timeless, then I would love to see his evidence for that. But sadly, he never gave any. He only spouted conjecture, which will not stop the Kalam.
Immaterial?
This is getting repetitive, but there's no reason to assert that the cause couldn't have been a material manifestation. Scientists don't think that the Big Bang was from nothing, but rather the expansion of a singularity containing all of our universe's matter and energy. Whatever was happening inside that singularity would certainly have been material as we know it. Earlier, Craig appealed to the second law of thermodynamics, but let's talk about the first law. Energy can be transformed, but it cannot be created nor destroyed. If this law holds, we need not appeal to a god to deal with infinite regress. Our eternal constant is energy. If energy has always existed, then it follows naturally that any existing universes could be a mere transformation of a part of that energy. This is my personal cosmology, that if something has to exist eternally, that thing is energy. The advantage of choosing energy over positing an eternal God is that we all agree that energy is a real thing.
Let's talk about the huge problem he's going to run into, because he is asserting that energy is eternal, which actually violates the standard Big Bang model, where space, time, matter, and energy all had a beginning. Think about it. If you had energy but no space, then where would you put it? And if you had energy but no time, then when would you put it? So I'm glad he brought up the laws of thermodynamics. I want to focus specifically on the first law of thermodynamics in regards to the conservation of energy. The reason I'm honing in on this is because he essentially said that energy cannot be created or destroyed. But that's not the full quote. Its energy cannot be created or destroyed in a closed or isolated system. He then posits that since energy can't be created in a closed system, and that the universe is a closed system, then energy must have been here forever. But like I have addressed, this actually creates an insurmountable tension with the second law of thermodynamics, which, as you know by now, says that usable energy in a closed system is running out over time. And if the universe has been around forever, that means it would have run out of usable energy by now, because it's a limited resource. I now want to quote 2 more scientists, named Barrow and Tipler, who wrote the following in their book, The Anthropic Cosmological Principle, to really bring this point home. They write, and I quote, At this singularity, space and time came into existence. Literally nothing existed before the singularity. So, if the universe originated at such a singularity, we would truly have a creation ex nihilo. End quote. Essentially, they are saying that nothing physical preceded the singularity, that the singularity itself was not past eternal, and that this singularity literally came out of nothing, which is what creation ex nihilo means. So it seems energy did not exist before the singularity, and that the singularity itself is not past eternal, because nothing existed before the singularity that was physical according to these scientists. And these scientists are also using the word quote-unquote universe to convey all of space-time reality. But this atheist said that scientists don't use the word universe in that way, so obviously he is mistaken. Again, he seems to be wrong here on multiple fronts, but even with that being said, let's press on.
Uncaused.
The cause of our universe could easily have been a caused thing. Perhaps our universe was caused by a quantum fluctuation, by the end of a prior universe, by the flapping of wings of a cosmic butterfly. The Kalam argues only for a sufficient cause of our particular universe. If something has to be uncaused, let's go with energy.
Let's not misunderstand the argument. The Kalam is referring to the ultimate cause of physical reality, not the immediate cause. For instance, the quantum fluctuation, the end of a prior universe, or the flapping of the wings of a cosmic butterfly all would also need causes, because they are all a part of physical reality. Therefore, even if these suggestions were true, the Kalam would still work perfectly. Also, by simply naming other alternatives, that does not disprove the Kalam. Rather, you would need to actually argue for these alternatives instead of just stating them, because so far, I am not hearing any valid arguments or good evidence for any of these supposed explanations. But let's hold out into the end, because trust me, the finale is going to be worth it.
And unimaginably powerful.
One last time, the Kalam argues only for a sufficient cause. An avalanche can be caused by the slip of a single pebble. There's no reason the cause of our universe needs to be anything more than adequate.
Much like God. The cosmological argument shows that, in fact, it is quite reasonable to believe that God does exist.
All the cosmological argument does is point toward a cause, but tells us nothing about that cause.
What I find really funny about this is that he just got done talking about the attributes that the cause of physical reality could be, but then he immediately changes on a dime, because he goes on to say that step 2 of the Kalam doesn't say anything about the cause, and that's literally what we just got done discussing. I elaborated on how his eternal energy constant fails, and how it isn't even a cause. We then discussed how the cause of physical reality cannot itself be composed of physical reality, and that means that the cause must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, uncaused, and powerful in order to cause a universe out of nothing. The fact that the atheist denied that step 2 of the Kalam doesn't exist when we just got done going through it is very unsettling. Up to this point, he has not given any good arguments or explanations that are valid, while his objections and critiques are lackluster at best. But let's see what else he has in store for us, because this is my favorite part.
When the argument is said and done, we are left asking, what caused the universe? Craig says God, and others more honestly say, we don't know. If you think that we don't know automatically equals God, then how is your thinking any different than those who decided that lightning came from Zeus? The only honest answer in all of this is something caused the universe, but we don't know what it was.
The atheist is saying that if someone doesn't appeal to ignorance, then they are dishonest. Now, this is a rich comment coming from an atheist who made a whole video which supposedly explains how other things besides God could cause the universe. So now I'm confused. Is he appealing to ignorance again so he won't be considered dishonest by his own standard? Or is he dishonest, by his own admission, by not appealing to ignorance to favor his own hypothesis? Because remember, he posited energy as a universal constant of a cosmos which is both eternal and finite according to his argument in the beginning. So he either thinks he knows, and in that sense he would be dishonest by his own standard because he's not appealing to ignorance, or he is appealing to ignorance, and if anyone else has a solution besides ignorance, then that person is dishonest. I also want to address what he said about Zeus. To compare Zeus, which has essentially no good evidence for him, to an uncaused, spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful cause which we would call God, who has many good arguments and evidence for his existence, is a false comparison. Ironically enough, since the atheist has to believe in something physical that is eternal to save their own atheistic naturalism, that is actually more in line with Greek thought than the Kalam Cosmological Argument, which was literally formulated to combat Greek thinking. So what does this have to do with Zeus? Obviously, the Greeks believed in an eternal universe and Zeus. So it seems that the atheist is actually closer to believing in Zeus and an eternal universe than Christians who believe in the Kalam, which literally refutes both of those things. In the end, the Kalam Cosmological Argument has been discussed, reformulated, and defended for millennia by Jews, Muslims, and Christians. The argument still stands as one of many testaments with respect to the cumulative evidence for the existence of God, so stay tuned for more videos just like this one. With that being said, I will see you in the next one.